Some of Israel's strongest European allies are putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu's government over the war in Gaza. It's led to the EU threatening to review its trade relationship with Israel. So just how far will Europe go in opposing Israel and its war in Gaza? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Robyn Dwyer. Israel is facing condemnation from European countries, most notably from its most loyal EU ally, Germany. The shift comes as dozens have been killed in Gaza collecting aid after a 3-month blockade of essential supplies. So is the tide finally turning against Israel, and will it make a difference?
Children crying with extreme hunger, people running in desperation for food. It's these scenes that have finally caused European nations to stir. From London to Berlin, Israel's most loyal allies have come out in condemnation of Israel's assault in Gaza.
What the Israeli army is doing now in the Gaza Strip, frankly, I no longer understand what the goal is. Harassing the civilian population to such an extent, as has increasingly been the case in the recent days, can no longer be justified as a fight against Hamas terrorism.
The recent announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza, a basic quantity, is totally and utterly inadequate. So we must coordinate our response, because this war has gone on for far too long.
Israel has been accused of using starvation as a weapon of war. A new aid distribution centre was established by Israel and the US called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. But according to reports, dozens have been killed when attempting to get food from the distribution site.
Palestinians have been presented the grimmest of choices: die from starvation or risk being killed while trying to access the meagre food that is being made available through Israel's militarised humanitarian assistance mechanism.
To put pressure on Israel, the European Union could suspend the EU-Israel Trade Association Agreement. The UK government has already halted negotiations for its new trade agreement. Is this a real turning point or just empty words? And most importantly, will it change the reality on the ground?
So let's meet our guests. And joining us from Gaza, we have Eyad Amawi, who's representative of the Gaza Relief Committee and a coordinator for local NGOs. From Dublin in Ireland is Francis Fitzgerald, former member of the European Parliament for Ireland and former Deputy Prime Minister in Ireland. And from Frankfurt in Germany, we have Weiland Hoban, who's a composer, translator and chairman of Jewish Voice for a Just Peace in the Middle East. And in Cairo in Egypt, we have Amira Nimerawi, who's CEO of Health Workers for Palestine. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being on the programme. I want to start with you, Eyad, because you're in Gaza, aren't you? Give us a sense, if you can of what conditions are like and the mood there.
Firstly, thank you for hosting me. I will talk about the worsening the situation from this morning, especially. The Israeli occupation forces forced a huge amount of population in the Khan Younis, especially, to be expelled and force them to be displaced from their homes. And they put them in the shrinked area in the western of the Gaza Strip, maybe in 40 square kilometers, without any foods, without any shelters, tents, sweet water. The situation here is worsened and become a catastrophe. Real humanitarian crisis here is implemented over the civilian, especially for over the children and elderly people. The situation, and after the GHF announced the distribution of aids, more than 100 martyrs and more than hundreds and hundreds of the casualties come to the ER in the Nasser hospital, especially, and the medical centers in the south. The horrible times that our people is still facing from the new illusion that GHF announced they distribute foods without any system. There is no guidance here over the ground. the control is loose. Our society here is they increase our suffering, and the famine is really horrible times for the children here. The situation, ongoing time will be worse. Nothing for the trucks of aids and especially for nutrition. Let they come into the Gaza. So it's a very bad situation by the time here.
We should say, of course, that Israel says the details surrounding these killings near aid centres aren't yet established, and Israel says that it was firing warning shots. Amira, I want to come to you because you work in the aid arena, don't you? Under this new aid distribution system, which is run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, backed by Israel and by the United States, does this system work? Could it actually operate in the way that it's intended?
Definitely not. I mean, I just find it very strange that we continue to be obsessed with what this particular foundation has been doing or not doing when we know for a fact that it is backed by a genocidal state. And you have Netanyahu, a wanted war criminal, who has been pushing for this particular initiative from the very start. And so Palestinians from well before it was even established and on the ground, as well as human rights experts, have been calling for intervention to prevent this initiative from going forwards. And sadly, again, we saw that despite the fact that Gaza has a history of 17 years where aid has been allowed to be weaponized. I mean, this isn't the first time during this particular genocide where we have seen aid, if you like, a wolf dressed up in lamb's clothing. The humanitarian pier that was allowed to be built was also used for raids in the Nusret refugee camp earlier in 2024. I think that for a very long time we have known before it was established and on the ground that this was aid that has been built to weaponize and to further the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And I note that you quoted what the Israelis have said, but the Israelis have shown time and time again during this genocide that the only thing that we can trust about what they say is their intent to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but across Palestine.
Clearly a dire situation in Gaza when it comes to aid, food, supplies. Weiland, do you think this is perhaps finally triggering a shift in the way that Israel's actions are being seen by other countries, by European countries?
Well, there has been a shift in the language, in the discourse, but talk is cheap. So let's see if actions follow words. I think it's clear that the kind of knee-jerk or boilerplate justification for the previous carnage, which was, they have to eliminate Hamas and, civilian casualties, that's all very regrettable, but collateral damage, and also this, ancient but never proven accusation of human shields, whereas we know that the Israeli army clearly does use human shields. But at least for the political conversation, this current situation where starvation is becoming intense and also really engineered, not just by creating a state of mass destruction, but by withholding aid. This seems to be, again, in the conversation, the discourse, the language, seems to be a kind of red line. And, speaking from Germany, this country is the second largest arms supplier to Israel. And as a matter of fact, the weapons that Germany has sold Israel in the last 19 months were worth almost €500 million, 485 million. The figure was just published. And so they are really knee deep in this genocide. They're knee deep in the blood of Gaza. And so they know that even though Western countries are used to impunity, I think they have The Hague, at least in their purview. They know, okay, this is starting maybe to look more like genocide, more irrefutably than than previously, and so they are liable in some way. And so it's in the interest of the West for the project of destruction that they are involved in to be less genocidal, so that they can somehow save face or legitimacy, because when you have so many countries involved, and also the European Union, which of course has now also issued verbally a kind of about face, when you have all these countries and organs supporting what happens, if it's found to be utterly illegitimate, then they have all delegitimized themselves in terms of upholding any kind of rules-based order, to use this typical phrase.
And Francis, the UN Human Rights Chief has called for an independent investigation into these killings at aid centres. The head of UNRWA has said aid distribution has become a death trap. If this setup continues, will we see, do you think, more countries calling it out, criticising Israel's actions?
Oh, I think that's inevitable with what we're seeing at present. I mean, you're already seeing a shift in the mood, I think, within Europe. You've seen France, the UK, Canada, Germany, already Ireland and Spain, really commenting more and more. And what's the level of tolerance that we're going to have in relation to what's happening? I mean, tens of thousands of people killed, humanitarian aid being used in the way that's been described earlier, the destruction of medical facilities, surgeons on our television screens day in, day out, talking in detail about the impact on women and children and men. And if you like, it's very, very disturbing to see the helplessness, if you like, of the international community, or the inability to interrupt this, the Netanyahu government, with their stated aim of destroying Hamas, but on the journey towards that, destroying all of Gaza, not caring about tens of thousands of people being killed. And it really makes one very concerned about international norms, standards, due process, rule of law. It's all gone out the window, actually. And everybody is almost powerless to intervene. The Irish government has called it genocide. I think others are joining in and seeing this as genocidal at present. And it's hard to think otherwise. But it's not really about the words. It's about what's happening to people. What's happening to families, the complete destruction of the entire area. I mean, it's utterly disturbing, and you don't want to be fatalistic and hopeless, but it's just going on and on and on, and the interruption seems close to impossible given the internal Israeli government situation.
And Eyad, I believe you're in Deir el-Balah in Gaza, aren't you? I wonder how much thoughts there are towards what the international community is thinking and perhaps doing, or how much thoughts are just thinking about what's needed most now.
Yeah, that's a very important question. As mentioned before from my colleagues in here, we need urgently interventions by opening the humanitarian corridors under the protection of the UN. It's the only solution now available, to save our lives, especially children. So the urgent interventions, it's made by the increase the pressure over the Israel, not just the statements in the media. There is no time here for waiting more and more, shifting in the position. It's very important, we can make a tangible change by the time, but there is no time here in Gaza to wait the shifting until achieve its destination. So the interventions must made directly from the international and the countries and the Council of Security or something like that, to stop and suspend the famine. The death here under the famine is horrible times, and when we talk in 21st century, and no one in the world can stop this genocide. Even though what is still happening, it's very important, I know. The shifting is very incredible, and the greatest things that's still happening in the Europe countries But I mean, we need to stop the famine at this moment and let the medical teams and medical evacuation center to get its job. The thousands of children are still waiting. The medical evacuation, the Israeli also prevented them. And the international community must do something for that.
And Amira, you talked about the lack of action so far. Why do you think that is? Is it something like compassion fatigue that's perhaps not galvanised the action that might have been expected?
I mean, I think simply it just comes down to the fact that there is a very clear lack of political will. As I said earlier, this is not the first time that aid has been weaponized against the Palestinian people. This is not the first time that Palestinians have been subjected to collective punishment, for example. 17 years of blockade and siege, particularly on Gaza, where, you know, just to touch on the medical sector, for example, one of the number one killers for women in Gaza was breast cancer, and the majority of those cases were completely preventable. But because Israel refused to allow the necessary screening equipment like mammograms and other treatments, for example, like radiotherapy that's necessary to treat other cancers, not just breast cancer, were not allowed. And so it is the total lack of political will to end the occupation and to prevent what is very clear, especially today. And as Eyad said, you know, it's devastating that we are at this point where 100,000 people have likely to have been killed. You have 1,500 health workers that have been targeted and killed, and a complete healthcare infrastructure targeted and killed. Where if we look at the trends from 5 years ago across Palestine, specifically with healthcare, we saw those warning signs even 5 years ago. And so it's the issue is that the campaign from the Israeli side to dehumanize Palestinians in the eyes of the rest of the world has been so effective. And quite frankly, the root cause of all of this is racism. Our children, our women, our men, our civilians, our hospitals, our clinics, our health workers are not human enough, it seems, not grievable enough for there to be tangible, concrete action.
And Weiland, we heard Amira there talk about the lack of political will to change anything here. When it comes to Germany, though, that has now started criticising Israel, hasn't it? Saying the offensive in Gaza can no longer be justified. And that's a big deal for Germany, isn't it? Given its relationship with Israel, shaped by the Holocaust, to be saying that it's something of a watershed moment.
Yes, as I said, the question is what actions will follow the words. Because okay, we have people saying it can't be justified anymore. People saying that this is not war. These are not legitimate methods of war, because of course we also had this, this cliche about self-defense being rehashed for the last 19 months. Israel having a right to defend itself, which I mean is not even true in terms of international law, seeing as Gaza is occupied territory. But again, hand-wringing among politicians, who only a couple of weeks ago, like the Chancellor, right, Friedrich Merz, when he was elected, he immediately said that he would call Netanyahu and invite him to visit Germany. And now he's saying, no, this is terrible, this has gone too far, we can't support this anymore. So, okay, do something about it. It's not that these states are not helpless. They are not unable to stop the genocide because they are actively involved. If Germany were just some bystander, that would be a different matter, because then it might say, oh, we don't know how to get involved. But Germany has been arming this genocide from day one, as well as all the political support. So that is something that they could simply stop doing. And they are now, shortly before, I believe, reviewing their arms policies regarding Israel. And if they now actually did stop those weapons, that would be a real step. But anything short of that, I mean, hand-wringing, head shaking, that's just not good enough. That's not going to save any lives. That maybe some people think it will help them save face, but that's about it.
So, Francis, clearly different EU countries have different points of view, but is there anything they could actually do at this point? And is there the political will to follow through on it?
I think what we're seeing is an increasing political will to take more serious action. We're seeing, as I've said already, more member states commenting and being more critical of Israel. I mean, Israel obviously had built up, for a whole variety of historical and other reasons, commercial reasons, huge political credit. And it has been very slow for other countries to question Israel, to comment, despite the evidence that we're seeing. But that's changing. And I think the European Parliament will take more and more clear action in relation to interrupting what we're seeing in terms of not having the humanitarian corridors that we urgently need, the famine that we're seeing. Whenever we've seen this in other parts of the world, we have acted decisively. Why not here? Why are we seeing starving children on our television screens? We can interrupt that. The aid lorries are there. We know how to get aid in. Why can't we? And it's really only by sustained political pressure and united political action that we will see change. I mean, how much more do we have to see in order for people to take coherent, consistent action to make sure that lives are saved and we interrupt what is going on? As I said earlier, whatever you call it genocide. Whatever you call it, look at the impact on the children, the women, the men. Look at the lives that are being lost. And any civilized democracy, I believe, cannot stand by and not take tougher action and make sure that there is a change. And I include the UN in that as well. I mean, it is utterly and totally, on any human level, on any human rights level, unacceptable what we are seeing.
So, Weiland, one thing being discussed in parts of the EU is looking again at the trade relationship with Israel. Is that the kind of thing that could make a difference?
I think any kind of pressure would be felt in Israel because basically Israel is accustomed to having the advantages, the privileges, essentially of a European state, one might say, in terms of EU agreements and, you know, and the number of exchange programs, partnerships. You know, the city I live in, Frankfurt, is also a twin city of Tel Aviv, and universities have. I mean, it's all across the spectrum in education, trade, research. You have ties to Israel. And any Israeli university is embedded in the occupation and is a place of research that is used for the occupation. No university in Israel is innocent. Every one of them should be boycotted. And these ties, these whole collaborative programs, they need to end. And of course, trade is going to hit them more in the short term. So I think that definitely would be a lever. And if you have several countries, I mean, I can see a country like Spain, which has already declared an arms embargo, also taking the next step. And indeed, you know, we had then other countries voting against Germany to review the association agreement with Israel. And then the next step would be to have actual sanctions of some kind.
So, Eyad, I wonder what your hopes are now for Gaza, both in the short term, in that what might make a difference now, but also in the future. What are you hoping for?
Okay, we hope the international community put sanctions over Israel because she didn't respect and compliances with the international humanitarian law. Until this moment, I mentioned we need urgent interventions, but in the future, we need to document the crimes that committed over our people here, and put the war criminals in the ICC courts, and must put this as a priority for the international community in the near futures. because our civilians here is still waiting real actions and tangible actions from the international community after the war is ended. The vital things I know now is to stop the war and make a tangible change for the nutrition here. And as I mentioned, we need to open the humanitarian corridor under the UN observation and protection. So it's two simple things that may be implemented by the increasing the political and diplomatic pressure over the Israeli.
Amira, Nimerawi, Francis Fitzgerald, Eyad Amawi and Weiland Hoban, thank you so much for sharing your voices and your expertise with us today on the programme. Thank you. And do remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.